come on. And I was like, what the fuck? And I was like, yeah, okay. So that's why I was like, oh, DM us. And so here he is. So like, it was really weird to me how it was like, I looked at his account as like one of those accounts that just probably puts out shit and doesn't fucking talk to anybody. You know what I'm saying? It just doesn't really associate with anybody, just does their stuff and leaves. And I was like, oh, wow, he actually hit me up to come on my show. I was like, that's pretty fucking wild. So I'm very actually excited to have this guest on. In my opinion, another reason is because it's on your typical SFK Twitter account either. So it is like kind of refreshing in that sense. Before we do introduce the guest, I am going to go back around the room and let people plug their stuff. Lisa, real quick, would you like to let everybody know they can get in contact with you or whatever you got going on?
Absolutely. Lisa Solis you can contact me on Twitter at Solis Lisa. And then also want to plug in our website, theoccultresearchinstitute.org. Lots of contributions to that website. And then also just thank you, Cole, so much for being here. Like Nick was saying, we started, like subscribing to your stuff. And I really like the presentation of it because you took each individual case and then put all the statistics about that in. That was something I'd never seen anybody do and needed to be done. So thank you for doing that. And thank you for being here.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah. I remember when I first came across the account, I was able to just like go down your Twitter and like see just all these statistics on the game. I was like, oh, this is wild.
Oh, yeah.
Information. So
yes.
Yeah, pretty cool. Anything else, Lisa? I'm sorry, I kind of cut you off there.
No, that was it.
Okay, awesome. Thank you very much. And JJ Vance, my man.
Howdy, folks. Nick, Lisa, appreciate the invite. Looking forward to the conversation. Cole, big fan of your Twitter feed there as well. I definitely enjoy the like Nick and Lisa point out some of the facts and easily digestible details, but also the patterns you've recognized as well. Some of the patterns in the cases you've formatted in some of your tweets I think that's very interesting and certainly worth our discussion this evening. So definitely looking forward to it. And piggyback on Nick, your comment before, after following Cole's Twitter feed there for a while, I reached out and invited him to do a podcast as well. So, I just thought that was funny. And he actually wrote me back here asking if I was going to be on the show tonight. I said, yeah, for sure. So definitely going to be a good conversation here on the Smiley Face Killers Code here.
Hell yeah. Looking very much forward to it. Real quick. Oh, did you already? Yeah, you already plugged your show, right?
JJ? Yeah. Host of Operation GCD. It's right there on the screen. And definitely looking forward to the conversation.
Yes, I think honestly, I think your link's in the bottom already now, but of course I'll edit afterwards. Before we do get to Cole, only because I just saw it right now in the chat, and I'll be totally honest with you, I really haven't said shit about it on the podcast, only one time. But I do have stickers that I'm sending out for free. I got this one for the Occult Rejects right here. It's done by my tattoo artist. It's just a QR code. It shows the Instagram thing. She also did this one too. This one's Release the Beast. Some nice. Yeah, at the Occult Rejects, and then it even has her tag up at the top if you want to ever get artwork or tattoo work from her. And then this is the one Darby O'Trill made. Chapter 17 Records, Ouija Mac, Darby O'Trill. He made this one. That one's got a QR code on there too. If you're interested in the stickers, hit me up on Instagram or Twitter, or even email us. Whatever, they're free. I'll send them out to you. And if you're willing to tag them and put them up in places, I'll definitely send you more. So, just reach out. That's it. And now, Cole, now on to you. Please let everybody know what your deal is. I guess, let them know about your Twitter account if you have any other stuff as well. And, I guess anything you want to plug or whatever.
So, yeah, I run the Staged Drownings Twitter page or X page, whatever you want to call it now. And that's really the only thing I have. And I got introduced into this whole Staged Drownings, Smiley Face Killers phenomenon because I used to live not too far away from where Dakota James in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania disappeared and unfortunately wound up dead in water. That's really the first case that caught my attention. And I decided to do some digging afterward, and I discovered Gannon, Gilbertson, you guys, Jim Smith, William Ramsey, and I kind of just fell into the rabbit hole of just this is going on in multiple places and this is not an accident. So since then, I kind of figured that people needed a more in-depth but condensed version of what's going on. So that's kind of what I tried doing with my Twitter page, is just laying out the specifics, but in a condensed format so people can still get the gist of everything and realize that this is not by accident.
Yeah. I would have to say I think a lot of these things are very questionable and not by accident. Yeah. What is it that really, before we even get into the other stuff, that you came across? I mean, I guess, what was it that really made you like want to start like getting deep into this? Was there like a point to where you were like, oh shit, this is crazy, and you actually like really was like, I got to start sharing this stuff?
Well, I'd say probably I looked
Well,
into
you know,
the
first
Dakota.
question. I don't even mean to put you on the spot.
Oh, you're okay.
I'm just wondering, like, were you into SFK stuff? Like, I guess part of it is like, did you feel like you needed to come out and share stuff because you thought other stuff was lacking the information?
Basically, yeah, to say the least. I feel like there just wasn't enough people doing it. I mean, obviously, there's like a good small knit group of people doing it, like you guys, Jim Smith, William Ramsey, Gannon and his team. But there just needed to be more done, I felt like. And I just felt like me doing, even running a Twitter page like how I am, I feel like that is just me doing my part in sharing the awareness of what's actually going on.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Now I know you said you kind of had. Do you want to like maybe get into like that one topic with that restaurant bar place?
Okay.
Yeah. Actually, I'm sorry. Big Brothers, right? Is that what it's called again?
There, I believe and I want to word this in a way to where we're not, I don't know how to say it really, to where we're not going to have problems with people. I don't want to insinuate that anybody is directly liable or responsible for anything. This is just patterns that I've noticed that stuck out to me.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I can even say from the stuff that I have the idea that this man's going to be talking about. This is all just showing information and just like wondering what could it be in theories. We're not
Right.
detectives. None of this stuff is 100% correct. Maybe, who knows? I will say I do think like the way you word stuff, I think also determines how many strikes you're going to get on YouTube. So I'm just keeping it real. So yeah, this is all just theories and guesses.
Yeah, no implications of any guilt. Just
Right.
zero allegations. Just saying, hey, look, this is weird, and you're allowed. And here in America, you're allowed to say, hey, this is weird. This is a weird pattern.
Right.
Yeah,
Called having an opinion.
A whole SFK series is really just like, this is what I found, and this just seems really weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So
if anything, if just real quick, if anything, if there are people out there that are frequenting these areas, maybe just to be more alert if you are within the vicinity areas, if anything, just a word of caution. That's all.
Very well.
Yep. And also, that's the same thing about saying men's drinks get drugged too. But also, as we discussed in our last Smiley Face Killers episode, lube also gets drugged with some GHB. So you got to watch out for that now too. It's not just the drinks.
Right.
He did his
Sorry.
stuff.
It's words of caution.
I'm sorry.
These are like the two kids of the class. You both can't stop it.
If we were all in a classroom, they would separate us.
Yeah, we'd be
I'm
fine.
now. I'm just gonna say that right now. Sorry.
All right, so go ahead, Cole. So I think we got it all out of the way. So
what I really first noticed, the first, I guess, hot spot with these cases that is very common would be La Crosse, Wisconsin. And I'd say that ranged from about the mid 90s to honestly up until about maybe 5 years ago. And what I first noticed was the repeated streets that these cases were happening on, or where the victims were last seen. And that would be 3rd and Pearl Street. And that area in Wisconsin is just solely, really just bars. I think it has like 50 some bars in like a few block radius. But a lot of these victims were coming from the same street and from the same couple bars. And that really stuck out to me, because why isn't this happening further into town where there's different bars? It's happening on the same street in the same few bars. And what's even more striking is that the same few bars where these victims were last seen are owned by the same people.
Yeah, that seems like an important factor in the mix because even if those people aren't directly involved, they're permitting such activities to transpire on their premises because even as liability as a property owner or bar owner, I mean, they could lose liquor licenses, be subjected to different lawsuits from families for drunk victims or victims folks who are victimized at their establishment. This goes on at bars across America where bars get sued for such activities. So it is odd that there was so much activity in lacrosse circulating around very specific few bar establishments when there are so many bars. Yeah, for sure. Very densely populated bar region there,
Right.
and not near the water. You're discussing an area that's a number of blocks from any water
Right.
and down a hill, down a fairly significant hill. I've been to La Crosse. I've checked this area out. It's a good sized hill.
So I guess one of the first things that I really noticed was the two bars that really stuck out to me on Third and Pearl Streets in La Crosse, particularly, would be the chain called Brothers Bar and Grill, and they also co-own. Uh, the co-owners, I guess they are brothers, like legitimately, like biological brothers,
Right.
and they also co-own the Library Bar, which is not, it's literally a few buildings down from the Brothers Bar and Grill location in La Crosse. And in Gannon and Gilbertson's book, Case Studies in Drowning Forensics, I have it here. It's a picture. It's on page 260 of their book in case anybody wants to go and look or reference it. I highlighted it. It says, they changed the names of the people, obviously, for privacy reasons, but I'll quote it here. It says, Ed and Matt are brothers and co-own both the library and Brothers Bars. So that's just my citation there for what I'm going to say. I have a number of victims written down here that are or were last seen either at the library or Brothers Bar or on the same street as both of these establishments. And I have 20 written down that are within a 2-mile radius of a Brothers Bar location, and they ended up dead in water.
That's interesting.
So
I saw that list. That is an extensive list you got there. That's good work there, Cole.
I even wrote more down since I sent that to you guys. Like I figured out more from different states. That's another thing. It spans not even just from La Crosse, Wisconsin with this chain, but Eau Claire, Milwaukee, both in Wisconsin, and then even Columbus, Ohio, Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Indianapolis, Indiana.
How about Chicago? Probably Chicago's got some locations, right?
I don't know if they have a location in Chicago that is the Brothers Bar name, but I do know that their parent company, they do own other bar chains that is not the name Brothers Bar.
But part of the family of network of bars.
Right.
Right.
That was going to be my next question. What kind of affiliation they have? If they are a franchise or if they are some sort of something, is there other stuff that they are, franchised with or that you know of? Yeah.
Nothing that I know of. I believe that it's just bar locations, but I did see I don't know how reputable the site is, but it did say that they were affiliated with hotel chains. But then again, I'm not too sure. I couldn't verify that by any means.
Right.
Yeah, it's certainly grounds for further research for sure. Some good discoveries relative to the volume of victims that have disappeared from around these locations, in and around these locations. I mean, right. 2 miles. That's a pretty close radius when you're talking about the number of bars. Again, it's the volume of bars that are in that area. Like, why is it always going to be around these kind of this bars owned by these people or bars with these alcohol being distributed? There's got to be a common factor amongst all of these if it's owned by the same people, right? There'll be other commonalities shared is what I mean. Like they're gonna, be other facets of their operations that are shared amongst some of these locations.
I couldn't agree more.
You know what if you don't mind me, kind of like stepping in and asking, not to put you on the spot. I really didn't think about it until JJ mentioned it now. But I already had the list up, the one that you sent me, and you said that you already have other ones. Are all of these, do they all share I wouldn't say drugging, but like a questionable, like this person didn't seem to drink much but ended up looking fucked up? Is that the case for all of them or most of them?
I'd say a majority of these victims were last seen in belligerent behavior that is unusual for their normal character. And I do have a screenshot again from Gannon and Gilbertson's book, and it has actually a chart of, I believe it's like 10 lacrosse victims, and it has the date that they went missing, the last bar they were seen at, and the status as if Gannon and Gilbertson believed the victim was drugged. And out of these 10, it says that 4 of them are a yes, that they were drugged.
Oh.
And 3 of those victims were last seen at the library, which is owned or co-owned by the same people who own Brothers Bar.
I think that was a place that I had found that was like across the street from one of them, I think.
Right.
And which 3 victims was that there, Cole?
It says Nate Kapfer from 1998 was last seen at the library, drugged, yes. Jeff Giese from April 11th, 99 at the library, drugged, yes. And Luke Homan from September 30th, 2006 at the library, drugged, yes.
Interesting. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think 2 of those 3 at least had items found at Riverside Park, right? Or the Hiawatha statue.
Yep. And that's something we could get into later, is this weird Indian Native American dynamic that's connected to all of this.
Oh, interesting.
Oh yeah, lacrosse is heavy with that because there was numerous of the victims. I believe at least one of them that you mentioned there. I believe it was Giese. Maybe Kapfer. Some of his belongings were found at the side of the Hiawatha statue.
Yep.
But the interesting part of that, I believe, in other characters like Jared Dion as well, which I believe was April of 2004.
Yep.
So a few years later. So spanning that time, numerous victims during the searches, the items were not at the Hiawatha statue. They would appear there later during like day 2 or day 3 of the search when that area has already been searched.
As if it was placed there.
Exactly. Dogs were not following scents to these locations. So it's not like the men were going to the Hiawatha. The men weren't necessarily going to the Hiawatha statue, but their belongings later were for some reason.
I agree.
It seemed to me like almost like an offering. Like they did the sacrifice, but part of that was some sort of offering of some sort of item from the victim.
I think also with the location, just particularly of that statue, with it being so close to the water, I think it also goes hand in hand with what you just said, JJ, and also just from a forensics and police investigation standpoint, that their items would be found there to, I don't know really what other phrase to use, but to set the stage of, this person's belongings were found near the water. So if they turn up in the water, it wouldn't be necessarily written off as suspicious.
That's exactly right. That's exactly what happened with Riley Strain as well. His debit card was planted near the water.
Yes.
Midway through his 8-day disappearance.
Which shows planning, which is evidence of planning. Yeah.
Yep.
Foreshadowing.
It's definitely a staged drowning.
Staged drowning. Perfect.
And that's really why I picked this name, because, I mean, I get where Gannon and Gilbertson were coming from for the time being when they were coming out with their information.
Sure.
But it's evolved so much since the mid-90s or 2008 when they went public with their findings. I mean, there's hundreds at this point, just in America alone.
Absolutely.
I actually think we should change SFK to stage drowning.
I think that's a great idea.
Because my opinion,
I would agree with that.
Too many things I think get lumped up into SFK. That's SFK.
I totally agree. In fact,
somebody just got tossed in water because it's just a normal thing to do. If you don't want to get caught, you're going to burn somebody or throw them in water. It's the best things to do. I mean, come on, let's just be honest here. Not all of them, like, we sacrificed, whatever. It's just, come on, man. Somebody got knocked off and tossed in a lake.
And I feel like with the smiley face killer name, I feel like that gives a chance for people to just write it off as if like, oh, there was no smiley face near the scene. And that gives people right.
Correct.
I think there's stuff that's probably a lot more deep spider-webbed and nefarious than most people would ever think, because of being stuck on this is all like, I don't know, some underground cult that's sacrificing people for I don't know, silly shit.
Well, I think it's numerous groups. In fact, there was a tweet I retweeted earlier from your timeline there, Cole, when I was looking through some of your tweets from Igor Sarsky, and he basically says that I would agree with that tweet wholeheartedly, because he basically said something to the effect of, this has become a mode of operations in which to kill somebody that is being used by numerous groups and growing around the world and evolving. And I totally agree with that's exactly what's going on. So calling it the smiley face killers, yeah, it's one aspect of it, but it's not like you're missing so much more of the picture that, with
At this
considering
point, if you have somebody with a boat, you could pretty much just start doing this shit yourself.
That's true.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of it's more organized than that, but like,
No,
at
I
the
know.
same time, like it's definitely more than one group doing it.
Yeah. Well, that's even another thing too. And I don't want to get stuck on this stuff, but it's like, I mean, some of this stuff I don't think is going to work unless it's the constant, like either coroners or the police department or somebody's involved. A lot of times people don't even want to look at that. And it's like, well, why are you even being bothered?
Well, I wonder also that you bring up a certain bar, right? And you look at the chains, and then no longer are you looking for victims that are turning up dead in water, but look at the chains and see how many homicides have been committed in an area that fits the MO of the victim. Not so much the water, but the victim itself. Because remember, I think it was Gannon that was about body fat, and he was talking about IQ, he was talking about education. I mean, these are all a lot of MOs that I think are undeniable that you should not ignore. And the water situation, it is an important MO. I'm not saying it's not, but what if they've diversified, and they don't use water in other locations, they use something else, and therefore those don't ever get lumped in. And so those are just kind of out in the ether, just not getting lumped in, but they are affiliated with having been to that specific location or that specific business. And that could lead you to other, clues, so to speak.
And I agree, Lisa. Like, I'm one off the top of my head, I'm thinking, like, what happens with the victims who are never found? Like, one that comes to my head immediately is James Lidka from Eau Claire, Wisconsin. He was on Water Street. There's a Brothers Bar location on Water Street, and that was in 2018, and his body has never been found. Where is he?
Wow. Wasn't Water Street one of those streets that I was saying that was coming up in a lot of the cases?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, it was.
It's fucking bizarre.
Oh. But and then looking at who they are affiliated with, of course, as an offshoot. But anyway, sorry, I digress.
Oh, you know what? I do want to get back to because we all kind of went off, and I did want to say the original reason I even asked Cole about that, and now you mentioned the library too has had people that have left there seem like a little too fucked up too, right?
Right.
See, now that's owned by them, correct?
Correct.
So like between that and then the other place itself, what I was trying to get at is I guess it's almost maybe a beyond coincidence or very whatever that. It's just if that's a commonality, I would think that's weird.
I agree.
Yeah, trying to say it the right way. that to me would get my attention. Maybe that's why I asked, because if it wasn't, then who knows. But if there's a lot of that coming up, I would wonder, the people serving possibly.
Well, yeah, I mean, it seems improbable these happen at the same general locations, and especially the brothers chain of bars with the same ownership. I always revert back to my Albuquerque hypothesis when I discuss these drownings relative to these bars and the druggings, because a town like La Crosse, where should have versus a college town like Albuquerque, New Mexico, which the university is far closer and the bars are far closer to the river than it is in La Crosse. They should have 3.5, 4 times more drownings in Albuquerque than they do in La Crosse, and they have 0. So it definitely seems to circle around some very specific geographical locations. And obviously in play with that is obviously the ownership of these establishments and why they're permitting these activities to go on there. So I think the focusing on who owns these establishments is definitely seems to be a key piece of to figure out what's going on.
Yes.
Right, and it seems like it's only clusters. Like, you don't see like one victim maybe in a certain city and then it happens ever so frequently in that same city. But it's like I can think of at least 10 plus in La Crosse alone. Why is there 10 plus in La Crosse but not anywhere else? I mean, why is there not just one victim, or if you want to call it accidental, why is there no accidental drownings that happen infrequently in other states, but there's frequent drownings like in La Crosse that happen practically every year coming from the same street?
Yep. Yeah, and it's not always as obvious. You had a tweet where you posted a case from 2018 that I totally missed out of East Du Bois, Illinois, where 14 years apart, you have people disappearing from the same block in a random and almost industrial area of just a couple shady bars and a strip club,
Right.
which is pretty much a blue collar town on a river, the Mississippi River, and you have two individuals that disappear from that same block. And it happens 14 years apart, so it's not as obvious as every year, like you were saying, that like in places like La Crosse. But those are the things that I find alarming, is when there's such a large gap in the time frame of these two cases. And that's not the only time that's occurred, but that's one of the more flagrant ones, because of the general rural area of the place, and just the fact that these guys were literally within feet of each other when they were last seen, 14 years apart, but literally like the same piece of real estate.
I agree, JJ. I mean, that victim that you were just mentioning from 2018, I'm looking here. His name is Daniel Gessner, and he was at a bar called The Other Side at 68 Sinsinawa Avenue. And that ties directly into Matt Krasicki in 2005, who was at the River Queen. That's at 31 Sinsinawa Avenue, literally the same street. And if you want to go even deeper, I mean, Gannon and Gilbertson, they never released the name of the victim where they found the spray painted words in Sinawa. But I believe, narrowing it down based off the location that they provided, I believe it would be either Eric Blair or Ryan Getz in East Lansing, Michigan.
Yeah, I think you're right with Blair. That's my guess. Yeah, and I think that's a very key piece of evidence that they may have discarded early on in their investigation because they didn't know what to do with it.
I agree.
And Krasicki, the other guy there in East Du Bois, Illinois, he's what I like to call the key to this entire situation. I think if someone, whatever's going on here with this drowning, especially the original Smiley Face Killer cult aspects of all these staged drownings, that the answer lies, in my opinion, within the lives of Matt Krasicki and Jared Dion. Two men that wrestled together in the Milwaukee area of Wisconsin in the same varsity wrestling team, disappeared roughly, I think, 18 months apart from one another and 200 miles away from one another. One in La Crosse, Wisconsin in April of 2004, and Krasicki, I think, was December of 2005 in East Du Bois, Illinois. So whatever's going on and all this stuff, in my opinion, the answer is really, if someone could figure out what was going on in those guys' lives and who they crawl, who's, whatever the epicenter of activity is, that they somehow cross paths with this cult. I think the answer lies somehow in those men's background. But to my understanding, I've never been able to get to whatever's going on there, and I'm not familiar if anyone else has. But Krasicki's an interesting character. His folks were very, very connected, politically speaking.
I agree, JJ. I think that's a great analysis. And I believe, just to touch on that, I believe Matt Krasicki's dad, he was a U.S. Marshal, I believe, for the local area.
For the Eastern District of Wisconsin, yeah. Yep. Each state gets split into two districts for the U.S. Marshal Service, and he was the marshal in charge of one. And his Krasicki's stepmother, I believe, was big in the ATF or DEA, one of the two.
It was one of the gun running stuff for the government.
It's a book that came out in 200.
But I mean, you do have a lot of kids that are involved, that have parents that are high political figures. And you almost wonder if I'm not saying all of them, but to me, when, of course, not to dwell on the Austin stuff, but to me, when the Jonathan Honey came across our view, and to see his connection, his dad, it almost seems like these are hits, or like somebody does something or to get back at the father or get back at the family or something like that. And I bet if you were to dig, there would be more threads to pull.
There was, on that note, there was a victim who was the nephew of the former governor of Missouri.
Yes.
His nephew was killed in Sacramento.
Yes.
Murdered on American River in a staged drowning situation on a mound, nonetheless. Go figure.
Yeah.
They have mounds in Sacramento too, California, which, a lot of the mounds are thought to be the Midwest, Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio. you know, these areas, Wisconsin, Minnesota, but
Right.
they have mounds out in the as well, and you know, and yeah, high profile victim right there. There's been a number of them. You're right. I think that the one there in Austin though, yeah, the being the son of the DARPA dude. I mean, that's right. The wheelhouse of spook activity right there.
Yeah.
I mean, doesn't get much spookier
Yeah.
than that.
Right. Exactly.
Well said. I don't know. Was there any Cole, back to that list of people? Was there anything like out of those people that you listed on there that you think kind of stuck out to you the most?
I'd say what really stuck out to me the most among the list of people that I sent you guys was basically a number of things. I mean, the wordplay in the street names, just I'd say that would be one of the main things, to be honest. Just either the location of where they were found, the name of the lake where they were found, the bar they were last seen at, or the street they were last on. I mean, I could go down and do some of the wordplay analysis if you'd like.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, I just pull up the list to follow along here.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll start, I guess, with the half moon. I do see a lot of like lunar, lunar wording in a lot of these cases. In Eau Claire, Wisconsin, Craig Burrows and Michael Knoll, they were both last seen on Water Street. There's a Brothers Bar location on Water Street in Eau Claire, and they were both found dead in water in Half Moon Lake. Todd Geib from Casanova, Michigan, he was last seen, or he was not last seen, but earlier in the day before he vanished, he was at the Half Moon Bar and Grill, and there was also a smiley face sticker on his grave. I believe it was like on the 3rd year anniversary of his death.
Yes.
Yep. And if I may interject there, Cole, and add something that happened.
There's a case in Boston. Of course.
Yeah, real quick. Todd Geib, the lake he lived on was Half Moon Lake, the mound complex there that he died on. He died in the adjacent lake, Obenhall Lake, is where he was located. But Obenhall Lake was included within the mound complex known as the Half Moon Lake Mound Complex.
Oh,
just wanted to piggyback.
Sorry, go ahead.
I think that the lunar aspects. I think to me that's some sort of occult death type meaning to that. I don't know the ins and the outs necessarily, but that's what my rough understanding of it might be. That's interesting.
I agree. I mean, there's something that we're just not getting with these names that means something to the people that are doing this.
What I was going to say is that there was speaking of Todd Geib, there was this controversy that they wanted to reopen the case because the new autopsy report had come out that he did not have water in the lungs. Isn't that correct? Yeah.
I believe they also detected GHB.
Yes, they did.
But yeah, I believe they had a number of medical examiners actually got behind trying to reopen that, where Michigan State Police was like, nope. That's another one where that's another case where the propaganda was heavy, real quick. Yes.
Well, I believe
the newspaper actually published an article saying Todd Geib was hit by a car and buried in a shallow grave. They ran that in the newspaper, like 10 days after dude was missing.
Wow,
that's some heavy propaganda.
Didn't the ME take it to an actual ME conference and have like all these people look at it, and they were like, "This doesn't make any sense. It needs to be reopened." So you even had a lot of medical examiners petitioning for it, and no dice.
Yep. And I think he had a variety of drugs in his system that just didn't make any sense.
Right. Yeah. He had, I believe, an antidepressant that he was not prescribed.
Hmm.
Do you have an antihistamine?
That I'm not too sure of.
It's in the case studies book. His toxicology report is in the game.
Yes, it is.
I can tell you right now, I remember when I was in prison, motherfuckers were getting lit off of antidepressants if they weren't supposed to take them.
Oh, really? Okay.
There's some people getting whacked, especially like some people
do that with sleeping pills.
Some people will get like a 300 milligrams of like Seroquel for an antidepressant, and it's like at that point, that's actually like the doses you're like actually tranquilizing somebody, and people be getting twisted off that in prison.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, like if you're not normally taking it, or especially like if you're somebody who doesn't even really party, and you're gonna pop one of those, you're gonna be lit. So I mean, believe it or not, some of those things, I could see it probably like adding that with alcohol. I would totally think this motherfucker's
That's what I was going to say. Yeah, that's got to increase the effect, right?
for sure. Sure.
I just looked it up real quick because I remember something peculiar about Todd, sorry, is that not only did he have the antidepressant, as well as he had two different antidepressants. I think they said that he was the one that was found floating up and down with his head and his shoulders out of the water.
Yes.
That he had minimal decomposition, even though he had been missing for 2 to 3 weeks.
In the summer.
Yes.
So
Yeah,
bugs
almost 3
and
weeks.
all of that should have basically left with nothing, but he was found in almost pristine condition.
Right. Which,
Yeah.
I mean, if you're up and down, my assumption is you're frozen.
Sure. Seems that way.
Think of it like at a block of ice, just like bobbing.
Yeah, I think there was questions surrounding
like,
lividity with him as well,
funny.
so it
That's
almost
what-
indicated that he was frozen.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, now that I think about it, I'm not sure if Guy had GHB or not, but those other drugs do seem very questionable as far as all the circumstances surrounding his death. And speaking of the adding with the alcohol, I think that's probably pretty significant as well. The one thing well, the other thing I guess I'll just make this point on Guy before I ramble on any further. The Oxygen TV show network did a great case study of using a pig to try to replicate the environment that Todd Guy would have been in for those same 3 weeks in that same pond. And, the results were pretty telling as far as Todd Guy was not in that pond for 20 days or whatever.
Right.
Just based upon what they were able to replicate with the pig, the dead pig in that same pond at the same time of year, so highly recommend watching that from the Oxygen TV series. If any folks of the interwebs want to understand that Todd Guy was not in that water.
Right. I think the two drugs that they did find him with was decipramine.
Decipramine?
I think so. I'm not good with drug names, sorry. But that actually is also used as an off-label to treat bulimia, as well as irritable overactive bladder, postherpetic neuralgia, ADHD, neuropathic pain. It almost seems to have somewhat of an antihistamine, maybe. I don't know.
That's what I was going to ask you, what kind of effect that might have.
That's a huge stretch to say that. But when you're looking at, irritable bowel syndrome, sometimes that is an anti-inflammatory and anti-something with, response.
It's an odd it's an odd cocktail you had there. Oh, I just remember what my other point was on Guy. So it seemed to me, at least to my understanding of the the case studies and drowning forensics book, that the way they explained it, at least, it sounded like they were kind of attributing the cult the members of they were at a field party that earlier that evening in Casanova, Michigan, Todd Guy's hometown. They were members of a cult, but they were drug dealers out of Lansing, Michigan. So it almost seemed to me like they were implying that might have been the same folks behind some of the Lansing crimes. As you had mentioned earlier, Cole, there was multiple victims in Lansing, Michigan, and that's where the Cincinnati graffiti was located as well. But it's certainly interesting that the detectives Gilbert and Gannon and Gilbertson and gang, 3 Gs there, had attributed the Todd Guy death to a drug dealing group out of drug traffickers out of Lansing, Michigan. Cocaine, I believe specifically cocaine trafficking. Probably more to that story is what I'm saying. As far as they were probably onto something. Is what I suspect.
I wanted to. You guys happen to know? I did see a question in there. I mean, the odds of you guys knowing is probably slim. But was there any military bases around these?
I saw that question. That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of military bases everywhere, so it's kind of tough. I mean, I would say it's what the more interesting thing to me is the number of veterans. And active duty members. There's numerous active duty members. In fact, there's and one of Cole's tweets, there's numerous, he highlighted in one of his tweets, there's numerous Navy active duty veterans that were stationed in North Carolina that disappeared in Boston while on shore leave. Their ship had pulled into port. I think things like that are more interesting relative to the military, to me.
To add to that question, I'm glad that question was asked because it should be asked. But I think what happens is, some of the where they're taking place, they are places of prominence. They have some sort of airport. They have some sort of school. They have university. Sorry, there's like a party scene, so to speak, right, of young crowd or whatever. But sometimes, at least with the case in Austin, you don't have so much as a military. But well, you have the Texas State Army, but at least within Austin, there used to be an Air Force base, and now it is an airport.
Sure.
And so how much of there used to be an Air Force. I mean, I'm sorry, there used to be a military base, but then it's been converted into something else.
That's a good point. There's a lot of those,
So
and
there
a
is
lot of
all
those
of
former active duty bases are now reserve bases or Air National, National Guard, Army or Air National Guard bases. Now that I think about it, one of my another active duty guy that disappeared, and well, his body has never been found, but I suspect he was likely victimized in a similar capacity by one of these Colts. It was out of Edwards Air Force Base north of Los Angeles. He disappeared in I believe it was Hermosa Beach. He was down there watching a UFC fight. Disappeared from a bar. Father, had kids. Good career in the Air Force. He was making rank at a decent rate. He was a sharp guy from my experiences working with him. But he disappeared from just out on the weekend from base. So there's been a number of active duty folks from coast to coast. Again, that's the most interesting stuff because, like you said, Lisa, there's kind of military bases everywhere. I mean, it's difficult to really discern much from that, I think.
Yeah, no, but it's still a valid question. I think all questions should be asked like that.
Absolutely.
I like what Dreadlock Juggalo is saying right here because it is kind of what I've been trying to push a little bit with some of these cases. The best hiding spot is in plain sight. That's why I think sometimes we're not suspecting anything because when these bodies are getting redropped, if that's the case, it's being done by people that are expected to be seen around doing certain things. Two, if it's even like, something that has, writing on it and it's, a company or a name or you have an outfit, something like that. I do think it could be almost as crazy as Ocean's 11.
Yeah. Like, like a van that says Rotary on the side or something.
Something like that, or a boat that does. Yeah, you knew where I was going with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's just
no, I 100% agree. I mean, it's what looks normal. That's what I spent a career in law enforcement, so one thing I picked up on real early is even when your folks are committing crimes and stuff, like they make it look normal, it's not that obvious. You know what I mean? Like you can go hand a bag of cash to somebody in a parking lot, and the other person hands a bag of pills. As long as you make it look normal, like it's not necessarily gonna people. It's not gonna trigger much for of a suspicious response from folks. It's those people that are ducking around, acting all shady, that's suddenly like, hey, there's something going on over here. But yeah, if you see like a cleaning service or a Rotary Club or
Lions Club,
some other sort of community organization, marked vehicle, and like, oh, they're just, they're a community organization. They're probably cleaning stuff up. They're nice guys. They bake stuff on the weekends and sell it to the community. They're people love them.
Even the Lions Club.
That's the great way to hide stuff.
Yeah. That's why
what'd you say about the Lions Club?
That's why I do think that's how some of these things get away with it, is because like they're things that are just seen out in public and they're known for certain things and you just never think anything about it. I mean, I just even find it weird how one, in all those situations I thought the Rotary Club was suspect. There was like a Lions Club, like a mile, like fucking walk, if not even. On like the same.
There another one does like bake sales on the weekends. The people in the community are like, that's the Lions Club. They make apple pies.
And there were people with the bars that were associated with it, and I was like, what the fuck? I mean, and what I really found was weird. It's like, and I think one of Gannon's books, like, doesn't he show like pictures of the eye? Because that's how a lot of times they look at people's to tell if they drowned, is that they looked in their eyes for like certain things. Go ahead, Lisa. Explain it. Yeah, go ahead.
No. They look at when they take the blood alcohol level, they do it from the vitreous humor, because it is the only thing that doesn't, or it's the last part to degrade of an aqueous solution or whatever. And versus, like once you ingest alcohol, your liver is quickly trying to digest it out, versus it stays in your eye, kind of not degraded to a certain point. And so the autopsies will look at that in terms of getting a better indication of an alcohol level, from what I understood.
Interesting.
Well, what I was going to say,
I think Cole had a statement on the eyes as well. Cole, did you have a statement there?
Cole, you there,
No?
Cole?
Cole?
You fell asleep.
You're muted.
He did.
Oh, there he is.
I'm sorry, I didn't even catch what you guys said.
Yeah, I
It was
like,
lagging for a second.
Oh, no
No,
worries.
it's okay.
no,
I thought
it's
you
all
guys
right.
were talking about the eyes and the forensic aspects. If not, no worries. I think.
Oh no,
Nick
yeah, I
might-
heard all of that.
Oh, okay.
I didn't know if you guys asked me a particular thing and I just didn't catch it.
No. Did you have any comments on the forensic aspects of the eyes and what they're evaluating?
I think that Gannon and Gilbertson do a great job in their assessment in their books, and I think that they do a really good job in putting the forensic standpoint as well in their book. I like how they do the forensics and also uh, provide information about the victims. I like how they really do the forensics, to be honest, that they really do it from a forensic standpoint, and that really is the book's title. I mean, Case Studies in Drowning Forensics.
Yep.
Well, what I was trying to get
That's
at,
a good point, Cole. They do an excellent forensic analysis there. I think it is one of the most obvious things they do point out in that book is whether or not a body died in water or a body died on land versus the film that and the cloudiness of the eyeballs and the when
Yes,
the bodies
Right.
yeah, and what I find, like, again,
during the decomposition.
this is probably just like a weird coincidence, or maybe it is something. But like what I was saying before, like if my theory on the Rotary might be involved, the Lions Club is also known for doing free eye checkups. Like they focus on eyeball shit.
Yep.
And it's like if you're also using the eyeballs to determine the cause of death, I don't know. It's just fucking weird to me.
And they also have a donation
This is
arm.
a strange parallel.
Yeah.
Lions Club thing.
What was that, Lisa?
I said they also have like this whole donor recipient arm to the whole.
They do organ donations?
I believe that either they help you to file the paperwork, or they take, or they facilitate, or something. But there is a whole arm to that whole checking the optometry angle for Lions Club.
Yeah, I may be very cynical in life, but I suspect anyone doing organ donations is involved in black market organ dealings. So that's just me. That's just where I'm at in life. But I don't want to accuse the Lions Club of doing the same stuff. But I think
that's a fair assessment. Well, I was going to say, if you see the price tag on organs,
exactly,
you'd almost. I mean, it.
Do you all recall the old? The very old, like James O'Keefe dressing up like a pimp walking into like Planned Parenthoods, and
I do remember.
He got some people talking about buying Lamborghinis working at a Planned Parenthood. I'm like, what the fuck is going on? When they were selling all these parts to like China and stuff, and medical facility, biomedical research and whatnot. Like, what? This is crazy.
Like liver and pancreas.
I just assume like stuff like that's the surface. So anytime you're dealing with organ stuff, I'm like, well, that's got to be pretty wild because the stuff that we do know is pretty wild.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. To a certain extent, I think I would actually expect those things to be going on with these victims, but they never are. No one's ever missing a kidney. No one's like, oh, this guy didn't have a lung. You know
or that you know of.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but that would be a whole nother layer of subterfuge going on here within the public, the government aspects of these cases, the public, authorities of these cases. Like because at some point I have to imagine, like, if that's going on, like they're co-opting like so many people. Like it's again, I'm a very cynical person, but like I'm like that's aggressive. I'm not saying it's not going on. It probably is going on in some places. I can imagine, but it's just not something. I don't think it's widespread amongst this phenomenon, and I would expect it to be almost like, because if you're victimizing people in murder, you're doing it for some sort of gain, right? Some sort of financial gain. That would seemingly be a great financial gain given the amount of money you can get for some organ stuff.
Right.
It doesn't. If it is going on, it doesn't seem very rampant.
Well, it's definitely not too far off for like people like medical examiners or coroners to even lie about what physical trauma a victim has. I mean, what comes to my mind instantly is Dakota James. I mean, they initially reported that he had no outside bruising at all, and they wouldn't even let his mother Pam look at his body. He was completely covered, and she identified him by an ankle tattoo. And through the Oxygen series, it was showed that he had literal ligature marks around his neck, and he had bruising on his fingers, which would be indicative of him trying to put his hands through what was ever strangling him to try to release the pressure.
That's a good point. That's a good point. And Patrick McNeil, they hid that for over a decade.
Right.
He
His
was
parents
beat,
didn't
burnt, and
even get the
bruised.
autopsy report for over a decade.
Yeah.
You know what's really interesting?
He was clearly tortured. Clearly tortured.
When you start talking about like these strangulations, there was even like stuff out on Long Island at one point with the different, I can't remember his name, where they almost called him the hyoid bone or something like that. Like he was
Yeah.
cracking or choking everybody there. Like that was his like signature move. So I guess. So like you even wonder if there's a.
Was this one of the known Long Island serial killers? I'm not familiar with this one.
I can't remember that. It might have been Bitcheroff was even doing that. And then I think there's like people that I think Rex might be getting pinned on him that kind of had that style killing done to him. So like
Joel Rifkin, does he fall in that department?
Or it could have been him. I don't know. There's two different dudes that
he was out there killing hookers.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. I think it's the one that was closer to Manaville because it might have been. Some people theorize that, I'm getting off topic here, but like Rex and I think Bittroff might have been using the same dumping grounds, just like the Pines in Long Island. It's like huge. I'm sure there's plenty of people in there.
It seems like a convenient area to dump a body. Like no one's really there. In an area like New York City, there's not a lot of rural spots. Like that's about as rural as it gets.
Yeah. Cole. Back to the those list of people. Was there other like weird coincidences or things that stuck out to you?
Oh, for sure. I mean, a lot of what I wrote down was again like the wordplay with either the location they were last seen, found in, or just where they were at in general. And another one, other than Water Street, I mean, we could touch on that if you'd like, just how many victims were last seen on a water street through multiple states. In Eau Claire alone, in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, there's Josh Snell, Craig Burrows, Michael Knoll, Jesse Miller, Ricky Gonzalez, James Lidka. That's just all in Eau Claire alone. In Milwaukee, there's Thomas Hecht. In Chicago, Jesse Ross, he was last seen on East North Water Street at a hotel during a mock UN conference meeting. Dakota James, during his attempted abduction a week before his disappearance, the hotel that he was at, where he was almost forced into a van before his friend showed up, the hotel was on South Water Street. So I'm looking at that as that was their original plan. Like they wanted him dead that night. Or if not, that was their plan being put into action that night. They wanted him on Water Street that night for a reason. And another one I noticed was the word pearl. That comes up a lot. And even in recent cases, like with a Lady Bird Lake victim, Mitchell Gutierrez, I'll get to him later, but with Pearl, I mean, in La Crosse, Wisconsin, a lot of these cases took place on 3rd and Pearl Street. And those cases I have are Richard Halvety, Charles Blatz, Nate Kaffer, Jeffrey Giese, Jared Dion, Luke Homan. And then it goes to New York. Josh Zostak, he was last seen at the Bayou Cafe, and that was located on 79 North Pearl Street. And then more recently in Austin, Texas, on Rainy Street, Mitchell Gutierrez was last seen going to the bar called Luster Pearl. So I wonder if these words mean something, like it is their lingo and it means something to the perpetrators that are doing this.
I suspect, Like I suspect it has some sort of significance, especially when it's replicated so many times over.
Yeah, that is
right.
Different bar names, different street names. Yeah, and looking at your list with the brothers list here, Cole, I mean, half the names here, I don't know if there's a great significance in this, but half the list is German, it seems, has German surnames.
Ooh.
And what's interesting is that Austin sits at the Hill Country, and that is heavily German.
Big time. Yeah, Fredericksburg, Germany, or Fredericksburg, Texas is.
Yeah,
that's a huge German population.
Yeah, on either side of Austin, to the west and the east, it's both German.
Yeah.
Czech, but mainly German.
And just to add to the, not to cut any of you off, but I mean,
No,
just to
no.
add, I heard one of you mention Fredericksburg, and it just so happens to be that Dakota James is originally from Fredericksburg, Maryland, and he went to Pittsburgh, PA to attend Duquesne University.
Yep. Yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff going on in the Pittsburgh area, especially when there was a couple cases on your timeline, Cole, that I was unfamiliar with. I mean, I'm familiar with the Jimmy Slack case, the Paul Kochu case. I think the local newspaper there in Pittsburgh did a great podcast series. Those two cases and Dakota James. I don't think they included much of Jimmy Slack, but they did Paul Kochu, I believe, and Dakota James in that series. Oh, that's interesting. German like the Zodiac, huh? Yeah, there's a lot of victims in and around Pittsburgh. I mean, there's no shortage of victims. Like there may be more victims in Pittsburgh than there are in Columbus or Cincinnati, and there's a lot in both of those cities that are nearby.
What came to mind with you saying about Pittsburgh is that I remember when Nick was looking up Brothers, there was the chain that is in State College, Nittany,
Oh,
Penn State.
Sandusky land.
Yep.
Yeah. That there's one there, and I think that's like what, a 2-hour drive from Pittsburgh.
It's a good distance. Yeah, it's a good distance.
But
Yeah.
I mean, you cover that in a night.
Oh, easily.
I believe there's at least one victim in State College, if not two.
Yeah. Interesting. It's very
And of course, the DA kind of died in a very staged drowning type situation. He was investigating the Sandusky case in State College, PA. It's all by the name of Ray Grecar, who's actually from Mound Country in Miamisburg, Ohio, originally, but he was the DA out there. They've never recovered his body, but they recovered his hard drive in the river, and he was last seen on surveillance camera near the river, which is no different than somebody like Dakota James last seen on surveillance camera near the river, and we're, there, but like I said, Grecar's body's never been recovered, but it's long suspected he was. I think he's been declared dead as a drowning, because again, they found his computer in the river, or his hard drive, at least.
That's interesting.
Separated from the computer.
They probably would be able to pull everything off the hard drive, but have no idea how the person died.
I mean, that dude was hardcore on investigating Sandusky. I mean, you want to talk about using this MO to get rid of political people. I mean, that dude had set up sting operations in victims' homes. He was hiding in closets while he had Sandusky coming over to meet a victim in the kitchen. He was doing the actual sting operation himself. He wasn't trusting anybody else. That dude was doing it himself. He was hardcore on busting Sandusky. He almost brought charges in '98, but failed. But yeah, I mean, looking at the files that were available on that dude, like there was a lot of people who hated that dude. It's just weird that he died under these kind of circumstances too, which again, I don't think it's necessarily a smiley face killer cult situation, but possibly, again, this like we were saying before, this MO is kind of evolved and being used by different groups because, why wouldn't you? If you're trying to do nefarious shit and kill someone, like I would be looking around like, well, what does everyone else get away with around here? You know what I mean? Like,
that's what I was just saying, right?
It just seems utilitarian, you're like gonna look around and see, like, well, it's like McDonald's and Burger King, like, what do they do? Like, what McDonald's like, or Burger King's like, what's McDonald's doing? We gotta do it better. Like, this one cult's like, these guys, this cult's perfected. These smiley face killer guys, they know what they're doing. So everyone's, other groups start doing it because these folks all cross paths in various underworld capacities, different groups do. So they're going to share. Oh yeah, we get rid of people this way now. Like, oh shit, that sounds like a good option. It's better than rolling them up in a carpet and throwing them in a landfill. You know what I mean? Like, it just seems like some groups are going to pick up onto this, be like, oh, that's a better way to dispose of somebody we don't like.
That's what I was just saying. Yeah, I mean, watch the first 48 enough seasons of that, you'll have a few ideas how to keep getting away with it. And like car burnings and drownings.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Cole, if you don't mind, could you give me when you mentioned those streets before, can you give me a few of them that you thought were weird that came up?
So there's a few that I thought were pretty weird. There's 3 that I have written down. And
Awesome. Can you give them to me?
Yeah, there's Water Street, and that takes place in Eau Claire, Milwaukee, Chicago, and Pittsburgh. There's Sinsinawa. There's the Sinsinawa Avenue in East Dubuque, Illinois, and that also goes hand in hand with the graffiti in East Lansing from the 90s. There's Pearl, and that goes with the lacrosse victims on 3rd and Pearl, and
Is that
then
street
Josh
or-
Sostak in Albany, New York.
Okay. Is that like a
And
street?
Sostak was an. Oh, go ahead, Nick. I'm sorry. What do you got?
Was traveling to Luster Pearl.
I'll just use Pearl. All right. No, I just want to like check like the numbers on these things. See if there's anything weird.
No, I was just thinking that Sostak guy was an interesting case because you could see how much he was drugged on the surveillance footage of him coming out of the bar. Like he was clearly drugged. He was not like there, he was one of the, speaking to the guys that were clearly over medicated by, in the drugging and abduction of these guys. Like they gave that guy too much, like whatever they gave him, probably too much GHB. He could barely stand up.
Right.
Not to take away from anything, but Leash in the chat. Yes, Jason Landry, I believe, was his name, and he was attending he was attending Texas State in San Marcos, Texas. Yeah, it is between San Antonio and Austin, and I believe he was on his way home or something, and he disappeared in December. I don't remember the year, but it was was it before COVID? Maybe it was after. I think they're trying to reopen the case here recently.
Okay.
November.
There seems to be a lot of victims, like not so much in Dallas necessarily. I don't think there's any in Dallas, but from Austin, that whole corridor south to Corpus Christi, it seems like through San Antonio, San Marcos, over to Houston. That seems to be the area of Texas that has all the victims.
Yes.
Like you don't see any in El Paso, you don't see any in Dallas. There's none in a college town like Lubbock, right?
And I wonder how.
It's
No,
kind of middle
not,
of nowhere.
not that I know of. Yeah, because it's in the middle of nowhere. But no, Texas Tech kids. I'm just kidding. Spoken for Aggie. But anyway, no, I think a lot of it too is I wonder how much of it is jurisdictions and territories, because in El Paso you have the killing fields. Killing fields, and then in El Paso
You're saying these are competing factions killing folks.
You have all of the women being slaughtered outside of El Paso and Ciudad Juarez. So I believe from what I understood, it was that if you were wanting to do a crime like that, you could go to El Paso and Ciudad Juarez and do it, and you would probably never get caught, from what I've understood, at least with women in terms of the crime again.
It's certainly plausible.
And so I wonder how,
possible.
like, no, this is, sanctioned for El Paso over here. But if you want young boys, it's in, Central Texas. You know what I mean? How much of it is territories? I don't know. This is just me speculating.
That's a good thought. It's a good thought. I mean, it's not where I was going with it was I was carving out the mound territory of the state of Texas. All the mounds are in the areas I just described where all the drownings, these staged drownings were going on, the murders of these young men, which is, the corridor from Austin down through Corpus Christi and over towards Houston.
And Corpus is now the new spot with Caleb that got discovered. And I believe there's also a couple of other
a lot down there.
Boys that their bodies have not been recovered in Corpus.
Oh, really?
So yeah, but I mean, there's not a whole lot of fresh water. It's mainly all salt water, or the bay, really. So I don't know if that counts. It's all fresh water dumpings or staged drownings. So
I think a lot of the cases down through, like, just given like the like you were saying, kind of the killing fields and some of the other history of mass murders in Texas. I think some of these cases down through that area of Corpus Christi through Houston, they kind of go ignored by a lot of like even the media down there. Like, whereas like some of the other places were in the Midwest, something like that, where seems like the media seems to focus on it more. Like the cases that go on down there, it seems to be like, oh well, this guy disappeared, and less of a big deal. Like, really no big deal here, you know what I mean? Usually it's just no big deal. They're like, this is an extra no big deal down here in South Texas.
I agree. Anyway, sorry. Cool. Taking your topics and running with them. That's what we're doing.
No, you're okay. You guys care if we go back to the Brothers Bar topic of this?
Yeah.
No.
Yes, please.
Okay, so there's a couple other things that I realized. So like I said, Brothers Bar and the library, their parent company is Fortney Hospitality Group, and that's based out of La Crosse, Wisconsin. And what stuck out to me with even their parent company name is in January 2006, there was a survivor of this type of crime named Cullen Fortney. And obviously his last name matches the name of Brothers Bar parent company. And he was not seen or not at a Brothers Bar location, but he was at a bar called John's Bar. And that was the last bar that Jared Dion was also at. And it makes me wonder why he was targeted that night. If he is related to any of the owners or affiliates of Brothers Bar. It just stuck out to me because of his last name and that he was a survivor.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
And another thing I realized,
he was a GHB victim as well, too, right? He's the guy that crawled into the ER off the riverside, and
yes,
they were able to determine that he was drugged with GHB.
Yes.
And given the half life of GHB, if I'm not mistaken, the half life is like like an hour. So you have 50% less each hour passes, and he still had a pretty significant amount when he came into the ER to the point where he was likely very drugged just 2 hours prior when he went to the river.
So that makes me wonder. A lot of the victims in La Crosse are held for a period of time. Like Nate Kapfer, he was held for a long time, but it seems like Cullen Fortney, it was like everything was done that night. And
yeah, he was very against all odds to survive a circumstance like that, being that drugged, dumped into a freezing cold river where he's going to get hypothermia within minutes. I mean, whoever did that to him, they fully expected him to die. It was by it's by a sheer strike of something, some sort of miracle that God's intervention that he survived that. Literally, like he had.
I agree.
Everything that he was facing, he should have been dead. Should have been dead.
I couldn't agree more. And another weird thing that I noticed was and this goes hand in hand with like the Native American Indian thing I mentioned earlier. Chris Jenkins, obviously you all know, is a very popular case, and he was reported at the Lone Tree Bar and Grill in Minneapolis. And I have an excerpt from Case Studies in Drowning Forensics here, and I'll just list the page and read a paragraph from it. It's on page 151 of the book, and it says, "We believe from the evidence that we uncovered that Chris Jenkins was definitely murdered, specifically drugged with GHB, abducted near the Lone Tree Bar and Grill, held for a period of time, suffocated, posed on his back with his hands placed across his chest, and then slid into the Mississippi. Chris was drugged. The police investigation into Chris's death centered on activity at the Lone Tree Bar and Grill. However, some documents that we received suggested that at some point during the evening he had gone over to Brothers Bar and Grill, which was 1 block north through the parking lot." And what's also ironic,
I did not know that. That's interesting.
Right? And both of these establishments are now permanently closed. And Chris Jenkins' Halloween costume that night, because he disappeared on Halloween, was a Native American Indian. And that also ties in hand with La Crosse, Wisconsin, with the victims' belongings being placed at the Hiawatha statue. And another thing with Chris Jenkins is there's a brother, he was last seen or reported seen at Lone Tree Bar and Grill, and Brothers Bar and Grill has a location in Lone Tree, Colorado.
Oh, weird.
Weird.
That's super weird. Yeah, I didn't know he went to the Brothers Bar that night. That's very strange. That's a case where I suspect there's police malfeasance going on, because there was a law enforcement officer from the PD that was clearly, at least knew more than what he was telling folks in the situation. He was the guy where Jenkins' girlfriend was wearing his uniform, his police uniform, as a costume. He was a bouncer at the bar, at the Lone Tree Bar that night. He's the one who kicked Jenkins out on the street.
Yeah,
same dude. Yeah,
and he
didn't. No, go ahead.
And even in Jan Jenkins' book, Chris's mom, she even says that during the police investigation, whenever her and her husband, Chris's dad, went to the Minneapolis PD to have them question this Mike Casey, that's his name, Officer Casey, that they refused to even question him because he was a married man with children and they didn't want to break up a family.
Yep. And it's a great guy to be in a cult right there, if you ask me, because you're going to be able to blackmail him. You know what I mean? As far as he's got a family, he's not going to, you're going to be able to dictate. He can be compromised, right? Seems
Right.
like, that'd be a great candidate for someone being, a government, authority person being in one of these cults. I think that's a great case. And speaking of Jan Jenkins, her brother was a regional director of the FBI.
Yes.
And they fought every battle to try to get his Chris Jenkins case to be declared a homicide or anyone to even investigate it. And they couldn't. So that just shows you the political power behind these deaths. A FBI regional director. There's like 13 of those dudes underneath the directors of the FBI. They're one of the head. These are the guys above the special agents in charge of a field office. That's where Chris Jenkins' maternal uncle sat in life, and they still couldn't investigate this dude's death. So very, very high political mucks are behind these deaths not being investigated.
And I think it was with the help
structurally
of
organized. Yeah.
Oh, not to cut you off, JJ, but I think it was with the help of his uncle that he is one of the very few cases that legally his death is ruled a homicide now after many years of it being ruled accidental.
Absolutely. Because even folks like Joey LaBute in Columbus, Ohio, his case wasn't ruled an accidental, but it also wasn't ruled a homicide. They just leave it as undetermined. But much like Chris Jenkins, my understanding is neither of these departments are continuing to investigate. They're basically open investigations, and if any information comes their way to the departments in the future, then they'll investigate it. But I stress that's probably not a very accurate statement. That's more of a political statement by these departments. There's simply not an interest to investigate these cases. They'll leave them open because they'll never be pressured to investigate it, and they can always just tell the public, look, we're trying. But
I agree.
Again, speaks to the political. These it's not obvious there's this huge political force behind not investigating these things, but it is very organized, it's very structured, and it has a lot of weight politically speaking. And as JJ, a man who worked at headquarters for the Air Force for 6 years in D.C., I have a general understanding of politics and the power in which it yields, even in shadowy forms. But this is the political structure behind these deaths. I can't quite wrap my brain all around.
JJ, I like how you mentioned Joey LaBute because he was last seen at the Union Cafe in Columbus, and there's a Brothers Bar location 1.1 miles away from the Union Cafe.
I did not know that's right there in the Short North District of Columbus.
Yep.
Was that a case you covered on our show, JJ Van?
Yeah, we just talked about that case and in our last show comparing. We've talked about it a couple times, but we were comparing Joey LaBute to Dakota James because they look so much alike. Their cases are so much alike, and their proximity to deaths are very close, 200 miles away. It's basically the next closest city on Interstate 70, Pittsburgh to Columbus. Although there's deaths in between. There's a couple deaths in the Zanesville region, which is like the halfway point between those two cities.
I saw somebody in the chat mention something about IHOP, and I was like, there was a case too that had an
IHOP.
Yeah, something to do with like some German things earlier, and I was like,
no, I was going to say
IHOP with one of the ones. Yeah.
If you compare the IHOP locations in America across like a map of Bigfoot sightings, they overlay one another, so you can almost conclude like Bigfoot loves IHOP. But I don't know about any IHOP connections to these deaths, these drowning deaths.
Oh, that is funny.
I was going to say with Gannon's book, I know you had said, Cole, that there seems to be very interesting wordplay and streets that may be related or associated, and maybe they are, kind of signaling to each other. And we mentioned this on JJ's show last week or week before last, Nick?
Yeah, it was last week, I believe. Yeah.
And so that we had mentioned something about the graffiti, and that there was supposedly graffiti left on some of these sites that where these stage drownings occur, and that each city had its specific graffiti, I guess, calling card or whatever, right? There were, I think, 11 types or something like that were specific to these killings, and that each city had their own particular one, almost indicating that it happened there in that city, kind of like I say calling card because I don't have a better phrase for it.
Sure, no, that's a good way to phrase it.
Could it be that some of these cities or wordplay of the cities is its also own calling card.
Sure.
I agree. I mean, I think, I think, I think with particularly Water Street and Pearl, those, I mean, they span multiple states and it's under the same circumstances. Just a man drugged at a bar, later found dead in water. Uh, just to point out again, like, I mean, Josh Zostak in Albany, New York, he was last seen at on Pearl Street, and that's in Albany, New York, and then goes hand in hand with La Crosse, Wisconsin, over 5 to 7 victims last seen on 3rd and Pearl Street, and then let alone Water Street, that spans, I mean, 4 states that I've at least noticed and written down. I think it's maybe even like a nudge to another group, like a poke at another group, like we notice you or something like that.
And that's usually what, gangs do, right? They kind of throw diss at other gangs
Throwing shade at the opponents, right? Got to talk some trash.
or
Gotta
what
push
have
turf
you.
wars.
At the and I wonder if this is like we're over here thinking that they're independent of each other and they probably all are in a chat group somewhere. Having, comparisons.
Sure.
But sorry. It's just I don't know.
No, I think there's a lot of these things that are going on. Yeah, I suspect there is a coded language with symbols and words that are used by these groups to communicate in varying capacities, both in league with one another and in opposition to one another.
Yeah, I agree.
And just another one that oh, sorry, not to cut you off.
No,
JJ.
go ahead. I was just going to make a comparison to outlaw biker gangs, but it's, just generally speaking, gangs do operate this way we're describing is what I was going to say. But yeah, go ahead, Cole.
So another one that I noticed was in Indianapolis, Indiana. There was a man named Walton Ward, and he was last seen at Landshark's Bar. And there's a Brothers Bar and Grill literally on the same street, Broad Ripple Avenue, and it's literally a 2-minute walk away. So it just shows that this chain spans multiple states, and there's so many victims. I have 20 written down that are in a 2-mile radius of this chain, and they all end up in the same death. Just somehow. I mean, and that is what I noticed is just the common denominator between all of these. And it's not to insinuate or point blame or allege these people are directly involved or anything, but that's just based off the data. This is what I notice.
Sure. No, and Indianapolis is a great spot to bring up because there's a lot of victims there. In fact, we were recently discussing the victimization through dating apps. There was actually a fellow there in Indianapolis, I believe, back in 2008 or 2009. He disappeared off the Broad Ripple neighborhood there. You were just describing there, Cole, and he was victimized through a straight dating app. We were recently talking about gay dating apps with Joey LaBute and Dakota James, but this fellow in Indianapolis was using a one of the IAC owned dating applications we discussed in our last episode there, Nick and Lisa, that corporation that has all their hands and all the Expedia and all the dating app stuff. And yeah, so there was definitely victims that have used their apps that we discussed before. One of those victims was in Indianapolis, and Indianapolis has a pretty large for as many cases that go on in Wisconsin. There's almost as many cases, or some place like La Crosse where there's I think 12 victims, 13 with Colin Fortney being the surviving guy since 1997, I believe.
Right.
But during that same time frame, more like early 2000s, 2003, 2004, to modern times, there's roughly 12 victims in Indianapolis. I'd say there's probably at least 9 during that time. In addition to the fellow you mentioned, there's at least 9 others that I can picture right now. One of which again uses a dating app. So yeah, I mean, there are cities that don't often get discussed in this phenomenon, and Indianapolis, in my opinion, is one of them. And again, if you want to talk about the connections to the quote unquote native connections or the mound connections, I mean, Indianapolis is a great location to have that conversation, just given the name and the environment. It's obviously mound country and was a town before the white folks settled it was a town that was obviously an epicenter of activity for the native folks before them. So I'm just saying the occult activity in that town could very well go back a long time.
Something I just want to ask too, because we had somebody in the chat ask, and there may be other people too who really don't know exactly the whole case with like a lot of supposed SFK or the stage drowning style stuff.
Yep.
Is this Cole? These people that you're covering, are they kind of fitting the other stuff that we've pointed out, where they're kind of like younger kids, or they're actually younger men, or they're actually still in college? Were they of like in their like mid to young 20s?
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's very few that I can think. I mean, there's some that are not in college but are college age for sure. There's very few that I see that are not in, I'd say, a range of like 17 to 28.
Now, from what I got out of like a lot of the ones that we even kind of covered, except for some of the older people, but like the younger ones, to me, I'm just because of the questions that Dreadlock was asking. It actually, in my opinion, because he was asking, like he was thinking that these might have been like kind of low income people that are just getting popped off. Actually, no, it's a complete actual opposite. Actually,
I think it's the actual opposite.
Yeah, I wouldn't say so much that the kids may have the older people. They have great jobs, for sure. The kids, though, I wouldn't say maybe they have great jobs, but their families are well off.
So no, but they're always very intelligent, very athletic.
Yeah.
Some of the guys we talked about tonight, Luke Holman in lacrosse, he was a college basketball player, D1 college basketball player. I think he transferred to lacrosse to get some more playing time to D2 level. He was a varsity high school quarterback and captain of his varsity team. Folks like Jared Dion, Matt Krasicki, varsity wrestlers, Dakota James, varsity swimmer and head of his swim team. So these aren't people that you expect to die. Chris Jenkins, head of his lacrosse team, lacrosse goalie. These are all very intelligent, highly educated, highly athletic, very capable young men. It's a calling.
Sometimes I think that's what makes the cases even seem weirder, is because normally like that's the profile that would get attention and they don't.
Mm-hmm.
Not to be stereotypical, but some of them you would think like those parents aren't making a scene about this. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, again, some of them do. Jan Jenkins made a huge scene. She wrote a book. Made a lot of scenes as far as getting folks motivated, but it only gets you so far in these cases. It's the roadblock that you hit from a political standpoint and getting anywhere past that.
JJ, I like how you brought up Dakota James again, because today I actually just posted on my Twitter page at Stage Drownings. There was a man in Pittsburgh who was the head of the Delta organization, which is who hosts the Pride Parade in Pittsburgh. And his name is Gary Van Horn. And based off his LinkedIn page, he actually is a bar owner and multiple restaurant owner. And he was charged with impersonating a public servant. He was impersonating a police officer. And he equipped his vehicle with lights and sirens. Yeah. And there's a clip that I posted on my Twitter page. It's only a couple seconds long, but it's him leaving one of his court appearances for that charge. And there's a smiley face sticker on the courthouse front door. And I think that was done on purpose, knowing that cameras would be there.
Yeah, I saw that. I was looking up his Van Horn group earlier today. I saw your tweet. Yeah, it's very interesting. That's a great find.
And he actually attended the same university, Duquesne University, as Dakota James. And knowing that he's involved in at least LGBT rights or organizations, Dakota James was openly gay and was openly on gay dating apps.
No, that's a great find. Yeah, there's a lot going on there that could certainly cross over with the Dakota James case.
There is a lot of speculation that there are others that were potentially meeting or involved in cases like that, but families have not wanted to come forward because they don't feel that it is, or maybe that they don't want to go through, they don't want for it to center on sexual identity versus taking away from the crime. But I do
Sure.
think that is an element of that there. If not, somehow it's tangent of it. I do feel strongly that that is an MO that we are not pursuing, because so many have withheld that information, and it's not just one; it's many others that we have seen. And everybody has their right to. I mean, it's families and stuff like that. But the thing is that I think that is an important angle that is not being explored, because so many people have not come forward. The families have not come forward to say yes or no, either way.
For sure. Yeah. I think
I
they don't want to stigmatize the murder of their loved one as far
Yeah,
as some sort
and
of hate
that's
crime.
but that's one of the MOs, though.
Yeah, I think it is a hate crime. They shouldn't be concerned about it. They need to be stigmatizing this. What's going on here? The people that are
Right.
killing these young men hate them. Hate them for various reasons, but they hate one of those reasons, it seems, could very well be given the uptick in homosexual victims.
Well, that's how
that could
I
be
think
one of the
that's
reasons
how
why they're
they're.
targeted.
I think that's how they're picking them,
Mhm.
is from
Yeah.
apps. And if you don't say that they're on these apps, then how
Yep.
are people stop getting picked up from these apps,
bingo.
Exactly.
murdered?
JJ, I
Yeah.
like how you brought up the hate crime aspect of it, because even if it's not a hate crime based off of sexual orientation, it's
Sure.
based off of the hate of something about the victim. And one that comes to my
Absolutely.
mind instantly is Joshua Guimone out of Collegeville, Minnesota. And I think that he was a victim of a hate crime. And I think it was, I don't know, I think his roommate was directly involved. His roommate that has appeared on multiple TV shows.
Even including the Unsolved Mysteries, right? Didn't they do this in
Right.
Unsolved Mysteries?
Yes. And he appeared on that. And
Yep.
he had relationships with Josh's ex-girlfriend, or they had some, like, a love triangle, if you would. And I think that Josh was headed for very prestigious places in his life, whether it be political or academics, because I know he wanted to be politically involved, whether it's local or even higher than local government. And I think that I think that people targeted Josh based off of that. They hated where
Mhm.
he was going to go, and Josh was certain people's competition, whether it be in academics or in jobs or in relationships. And I agree. I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think a majority of these are hate crimes, whether or not it's based off sexual orientation, but within where they're going in life, or if the perpetrator felt like the victim had wronged them in some way or was in their way of something.
For sure. Yeah, that's for sure. You're spot on target.
No.
It's an aspect I think it's overlooked because, obviously the act of murder is in itself kind of hate, but like this is the targeting, the whole process of the victimization of these young men is they're motivated by very specific hatred. Yeah. I mean, you can see it in like the autopsy results of Patrick McNeil. He was tortured. I mean, whoever did that, it wasn't just about killing him. They hated that. There was an aspect of hate going on there, like a deep resentment towards the victim, where they're going to burn them, they're going to cut them, they're going to keep them alive for an extended period of time while doing these things over a prolonged period. Yeah, it's all you got to have a lot of hate to accomplish tasks. It's not just stabbing a guy or not just drowning a guy. Like, wow, there's a focused hate going on here.
Have you guys seen William Ramsey? Oh, not to cut you off, Nick, but have you guys seen William Ramsey's first documentary where there was the 9 Inch Nails video broken that mimics Patrick McNeil's death? I mean, I guess
Absolutely.
Patrick McNeil's death mimics the broken video, but I mean, it's practically hand in hand with Patrick McNeil's injuries and then what is shown in that video.
No, it's a great point, Cole. I think that actually captures some of the psychosexual aspects of these crimes as well. So in the torturing and stuff, there is like a sexual component to that, and I think that is depicted in that 9 Inch Nails, in a bondage scene where they kidnap an individual off a street and then put him in this waterboarding kind of bondage situation, water torture situation. Which, yeah, I think there's something to some of that stuff. And again, the people behind that video seem very occult. Process church occult oriented. It was actually that music was recorded in the home the Manson family killed the Sharon Tate and gang in there.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah, yep. Yep. In fact, Trent Reznor even named it after the murders. He named his studio Little Pig Studios after
Wow.
what was scrawled in blood on the walls of the murder. So there's a direct connection between that video and some very creepy cult activity.
And that
I do.
video itself. Oh, sorry, Liza. Or
No, go
Lisa,
ahead.
you
Go
go
ahead.
first.
It's okay. No,
Okay.
go.
So,
Go.
and another aspect with that video is it's very grunge like. I don't really know what other word to use for it, but it's very raw. Like it shows from the POV, like first person point of view. They're pulling up to a young man on the side of the road. They get him to get in his car. They take him to some place discreet, and they just torture him to death.
Yep. It's also very similar to a murder that occurred in the 80s in New York City, the death mass murder of a young man who was abducted from a gay club in New York City and died in a very similar capacity. Very similar nature, but he didn't die and was left in water. And I often wonder if that's how this initial cult group learned their lesson, was by dumping that guy, shooting him in the head and dumping him out in the woods, and they learned their lesson to create a better MO. I only say the cult group because no different than the process church connections to things like the Manson murders and stuff in that music video from Nine Inch Nails. There's connections from that same organization to that murder there from the gay underground in New York City in the 80s. So it's the Andrew Crispo murders and art gallery owner. Andrew Crispo was one of the parties culpable in the murder. He didn't serve any time, wasn't convicted like his associate, but they victimized the guy. Yeah, basically in the same manner you're describing, pulling up to a guy on the street, it seems like, and then pulling him into their car, and then through probably some sort of coercion, and oftentimes, but yeah, and then torture him. Yeah, it's in an S&M kind of environment. It's pretty frightening.
I was going to say, I think one of the things that we mentioned early on when we first talked about SFK, I think this was like last year, me, JJ, and Nick, that there is an element of music to this. But I think people have said it so often in the past, we forget to mention it, in that there is this rave scene, underground EDM type association with it. I know in Austin there is, and that there's an underground tunnel where there's a rave scene not too far from some of these places where the people have been last seen. Not that they were there, but that they disappeared close by to that scene, so to speak.
Sure.
They disappeared from the tunnel. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that the location is close by. So with the whole Nine Inch Nails association or mention, yes, I do think that there is that. And I think we talked about that in the series, where we do feel that there is potentially an element of bands showing up. They come in and out of places. No one's going to question that they're in a location and then gone the next day. There's potentiality for a lot of, in plain sight deals such as that.
Yes.
Yep. And there was the 3 men out of the Mirage EDM Industrial Rock Club in Brooklyn, New York, last July and August. 3 men were abducted from there. Very, very well-educated young men. One was 2 of them were doctors, and one was a psychologist. One was a Wall Street broker. The other one was a medical doctor. The medical doctor was kidnapped and found in Westchester County, New York, which I find there's a lot more to that story. The other 2 men were found drowned in the creek behind Mirage, within a week or so of their disappearance. Nonetheless, all 3 of them seem to have been abducted out from an EDM, club.
Right.
And just to touch on like the underground aspect of all this in the music scene, there's in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where Chris Jenkins and Jacob Anderson and many others went missing and ended up in water. There's a location called Nicollet Island, which is basically like a little island of land on the river in between 2 parts of the city. And it's less than a mile of where Chris Jenkins went missing. And there's underground tunnels there called Satan's Cave. And if you even look, just Google it, I mean, there's so much satanic graffiti and just so much dark stuff written and stuff that takes place in those underground tunnels. It's called Satan's Cave in Nicollet Island, Minneapolis.
Interesting. I'm not familiar with that. I'm definitely going to check that out because there's lots of victims from the Minneapolis-St. Paul region, not just Chris Jenkins.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, Jacob Anderson, he's a
Yeah.
lacrosse goalie or head of his team captain, just like Chris Jenkins, both from the same region of Minneapolis. They disappeared less than 2 miles apart from each other and ended up in the same. I mean, they had the same demise, unfortunately.
Sure.
See, this is like the stuff like even when we were like looking at stuff in Austin. I mean, it was there in this one other spot. I can't remember where we looked. Where there was like, you start seeing like music venues being like owned again by like a bunch of them by the same people. You got a bunch of bars by the same people, and you see them in different cities and states, and it's just, I don't know. Sometimes I think it's like, to me, like, could that be like, the music venues involved, the bars involved, like you have all these things that are connected but kind of separated. It just seems like it's a real easy way to, like, I do question some of the music stuff, and it does have nothing to do with the style of music. Actually, it's just the legit company is being able to be somewhere where drugs can be used as well, easily.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about this. We're talking about the rave scene. I mean, I went to the rave. I went to raves for years. If I wasn't old enough and the shit was decent, I'd probably still be going. But not knocking that style of music. But odds are, if somebody comes out of there and you want to abduct them, you probably don't have to give them any fucking drugs at this point either.
They've already taken it themselves.
Like, it's Game 100. I was taking everything.
They dose themselves. That's a good point.
Just fucking walking out like RoboCop, dusted. You know what I'm saying?
That's a good point. A lot of drugs in those environments for sure. A lot of folks dose themselves.
Yeah.
And just another thing to
Absolutely.
add on to the music aspect of it. Josh Zostak, who I mentioned earlier, who was at the Bayou Cafe in Albany, New York, who was on 79 North Pearl Street. He was a disc jockey. He was a DJ.
Oh.
And Jesse Ross, who was in Chicago, Illinois. This is another connection. I mean, Jesse Ross had an unpaid internship, and he worked at it was a radio station called The Vibe, and it was 95.7 FM. It was a radio station, and Luke Homan in La Crosse was.
Oh shit. Cole, I think we lost you there, buddy.
Did we lose Cole?
Yeah, sounded like it.
He was on a roll there too, man. I hadn't heard a couple of those details.
You back
Can you hear
there,
me
Cole?
still?
Yeah, now we can hear you. Yes.
Okay. So
You're gonna have to please start all over again if you don't mind, sir. Please.
Oh, you're good. So Jesse Ross, he had an unpaid internship at a radio station called The Vibe, and he disappeared in Chicago. And Luke Homan visited a bar the night he disappeared called The Vibe in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and they had disappeared 52 days apart.
Weird. That's
So
interesting.
that's what I mean. It's like
the name game certainly sticks out there, doesn't it?
Right. Yes, there's wordplay, and it means something that we're just not picking up. It means something to the people doing this, whether it's just like a poke at another group who's doing this, or it's just their own sick way of mentioning previous crimes or something.
Yeah, and I think the important thing to note on that note there, Cole, is which is a great point, is it may mean absolutely nothing, like just generally speaking and logically speaking. However, to these groups, the connections of these names and the connecting of these crimes through names does seem to carry some weight given all these examples. So I'm just saying, like, even like on its face, it may not mean anything. Like, it may just be ridiculous, but that ridiculous thing may in fact be what the cult belief system is.
And added on top of the Water Street, the Sinsinawa, Pearl, the Vibe. I mean, there's too many for it to not mean anything to the people doing this. Granted, the situation that the victims ended up in.
For sure. And I saw a comment regarding the Blue Oyster Cult relative to the Pearl name, trend and routine here. Which I think that's an interesting point because the Blue Oyster Cult, very processing cult. Blue Oyster Cult band, a very processing cult band. they're very much espouse the ideals and characteristics of the Process Church in their album artwork and some of their lyrics. I just think it's interesting because out of what's the product of the oyster is the pearl. So just,
Right.
Throwing that out there. That's a great comment in the chat there. I think it was P. Thomas that said that.
Another thing music related, I mean, that I could think of is Tommy Booth. If you guys are familiar with his case out of Philadelphia,
Oh,
PA.
for sure.
There is I can't verify this 100%. Granted, the case happened almost like 14 years ago now, but there was pictures that are supposedly taken from the night he disappeared of the band that was playing that night, and one of the band members was wearing it looked like a sadistic smiley face. It looked like an evil smiley face on his shirt, and I can send you guys pictures and DMs if you'd like. And
please do.
Yeah, I mean that's.
I'm familiar. I'm familiar with that narrative. I'm not sure if I've seen the pictures, but I am familiar with that narrative. And Tommy Booth's another interesting character relative to the kind of the military-industrial spooky nature surrounding these crimes. He seemed to be somebody that was being recruited into this cult or a
I
cult
agree.
relative to these circumstances, right? Because he had that warning to his uncle prior to his death, saying like, "Hey, I'm involved with these people. I don't want to be. They're involved with drugs, guns, sex." That's kind of what the Process Church and other cults similar to that cult have been known in motorcycle gangs. These are the organized criminal groups of varying capacities, all sell drugs, guns, and people. Tommy Booth said that to his uncle. His uncle that he told that to, though, was a U.S. Army colonel. So I'm just saying, like,
yes,
there's probably more to that story.
And even to mention another music aspect that I could think of, Luke Homan out of La Crosse, Wisconsin, in police reports and even in the Drowning in Forensics books, it's mentioned that he got into an altercation with the band that was playing at the bar he visited that night, where he allegedly urinated on their equipment, and then a fight broke out. But the person that he was with, I believe his name is Austin. He was also in Riverside Park that night, where the Hiawatha statue is, and he's changed his story so many times, and he was actually charged with obstruction of justice for changing his story so many times.
Right. That's a great point. And to that Hiawatha statue again, I believe they've actually removed the statue now, but to the location that statue once sat there in Riverside Park was I believe a 40-foot mound, 40-foot Adena mound. So that area, that specific plot of land where that park sits today, and where all these deaths in La Crosse revolve around that location, despite no one seeing the victims at that location, but their belongings or dogs detected to that location for different victims. That site would be very important amongst the mound builders because it's at the confluence of three rivers. And not unlike Pittsburgh, which sits at the confluence of three rivers. And all the mounds that have existed there in Pittsburgh, but La Crosse specifically, that was the major mound in La Crosse that sat at that Riverside Park. It seemed like whatever was going on amongst the mound builders in that area, that specific geographical location of La Crosse, Wisconsin, it focused around the giant mound that sat inside Riverside Park. And we have a very good understanding of what La Crosse mounds looked like prior to the mass colonial movement across America, thanks to organizations like the Society of Cincinnati, who started America, and folks like Lieutenant Zebulon Pike, who I believe did a survey of La Crosse, Wisconsin in 1803. Just relatively speaking, 1803 was the year Ohio was admitted into the Union, the first state that was not part of the original 13 colonies. So that's a pretty early time to be getting out there and documenting and surveying these mounds. So we have a good understanding of what's out in La Crosse before the city these mounds were destroyed by putting numerous buildings or whatever on top of it. I'm just saying, like, it seems like La Crosse being the epicenter of this activity of the Smiley Face Killer deaths, that everything revolving around that park, it's hard to say that there's not some sort of mound aspect to these murders, in my opinion.
JJ, if I may interject real quick, y'all were talking about Riverside, and I didn't even dawn on me until right now that the street that runs on the west side of the river, south side, west side of the river is called
In Austin?
Riverside. Is called Riverside.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's
More name
changed.
games.
It's changed its names, right? Because they've added
Sure.
streets and they've kind of, built up, multi-rise, and then they make another street. So now there's Lakeview, but back in the day, the main street that ran on parallel to Riverside, I'm sorry, to the river was Riverside on the
That's interesting.
west side of the river. Hmm. Or maybe the south side. I think it's the south side of the river. I'm not good with obviously directions. I want to
No,
say
but
it's
I
the
think
south
it
side,
speaks
yeah.
to more of that name game. There's a lot of
Yeah.
Riversides and a lot of these towns, where a lot of these, I'm sure, Brothers Bar sits. I'm sure we took an analysis of these Brothers Bar locations versus things called River Street or Riverside. I imagine there's a handful of them that sit in those locations. And again,
Mhm.
likely, mounds were sitting there. I mean, not all mounds are next to rivers, but most mounds were next to rivers, especially the ones that I'm most interested in, the oldest Adena mounds that were used for human sacrifice, it seems.
Right.
I would wonder, well, like, what groups of people were in that area when those streets got named that?
Well,
there was
it kind of
Go
speaks to,
back to like militias, basically.
well, if you want to bring up some of those screenshots I sent you, Nick, kind of speaks to that right there. So relative to some of these, a lot of the cities across America, I call it the Society Cincinnati Code. It was named, a lot of these streets, especially with mound locations, were named after members of the society, whether it's Washington, whether it's Lafayette, or folks like Thomas Jefferson, who had early militia connections within Virginia, maybe not officially a society member, but he was pro-society, and his sons were members of the society, it seems. And he was also the first archaeologist to dig into these mounds. So there's a lot of streets named after Jefferson. Alexander Hamilton would be another one of these. And all of these are exemplified in that one case I sent you out of Jersey City, New Jersey.
All right, let me just download.
With a fellow named Luis Garcia. I believe he's 27. Didn't necessarily seem like this is where I think some of the evolution of this MO is gone to amongst, or how different cults or different cells in different cities do operate. Maybe some of them are more focused on stalking those college campuses, while other ones are happy to pick a 27-year-old out of a bar and I say that because of, in this instance, because of opportunity, right? I think some of these are very organized, very planned. They're stalking the victims. I think some victims are opportunity. I think Luis Garcia, a 27-year-old man in Jersey City, walked into what essentially was a spider web. He happened to go drinking at a bar on a mound site, and then was later recovered from a different mound site. Disappeared from a bar, drinking, seemingly just vanished out of thin air.
I would agree with you.
Was found in a few feet of water. Oh, what's that, Lisa?
I said I would agree with you. I think some of these are crimes of opportunity. I think some of them are crimes because they're a hit. I think, again, I do not think one
different motives
pattern. This is exactly why and how come. I think it's a multi-layered syndicate that, hey, we got a body. Who needs?
Yep. Yeah, and in the case of Luis Garcia, we have Luis Garcia's body recovered from a very shallow water reservoir near the Hoboken Tunnel, which I'm sure, or near the Holland Tunnel there in Hoboken, which I'm sure Nick's fairly familiar with this area. It's like all these black dots I have here on this image. These are all mound sites, and I have some of them highlighted in later images. The other orange dot here on the bottom of the screen is where Luis Garcia disappeared from, right near Hamilton Park, another mound site. But he's recovered on Jefferson Street in a very shallow reservoir. Again, Thomas Jefferson. And if you want to go from where he disappeared to the other orange dot here, the other orange marker, if you want to look at what's the closest body of water, well, the closest body of water was this the Hudson? Is the Hudson? Yeah, the Hudson River. So he didn't go being found drowned in the Hudson where there's no mounds. He got found where there was a mound site on a Jefferson Street. And he disappeared. You want to go to the next image, please, Nick? Yeah, Luis. There we go. Luis Garcia's body recovered. You see, it's the only area of water in that vicinity away from the Hudson, in that for miles. So where else is he going to be found drowned except for again, no one. They never even tried to explain how this man got there. They were just like, oh, he disappeared and later found on this. Yeah, he drowned. Whatever. Literally, no, there wasn't even any local interest whatsoever in this case. I was following it when it occurred back in 2017, I believe July 15th, 2017. Can you go to the next image there, Nick, and we'll.
Is it? Or did JJ get stuck now too?
I think so.
Yeah.
I thought he was looking. I thought he was looking intently. Oh, there he is.
I'm back. So then you can see the four. I put 4 black markers there to signify the mound complex that area was built upon and named after Alexander Hamilton, right? So, and then on the next image, you'll see that where this is marked Horsmus Cove, whatever. I'm not even sure that name. That's a strange name. If you can go to the next image, Nick, I'll show you that this site is extra spooky because there was an 8-foot skeleton located, literally, in my opinion, right where this bar is, where the guy disappeared. I put TBD because the exact location in this neighborhood was not dictated in this survey, which I have linked here from the Library of Congress. Again, this is some very old. We have a lot of very old records in this country regarding these mounds, thanks to the Society of Cincinnati folks. But yeah, the my screen's touchscreen here. I accidentally just minimized that for a second. Couldn't see anything. So, but yeah, you can see the proximity. So you have more mounds to the south of this guy where the bar is at. I suspect this mound where the 8-foot giant skeleton was recovered from, that was probably in and around where the exact bar location was. Again, the marker's different because it just says the neighborhood. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say if there is any connection between these murders and human sacrifice in these mounds, to me, it would be important to take somebody from a bar that was built on one of these mounds. So I'm just saying, like, this is a scenario where that very likely could have been the case. And to speak to more of this name game I'm talking about here, you can see a lot of society names just here in this thing besides just Hamilton. You got Mercer right here. And on the next one, you have Washington. So the original settlement, you can go to the next picture. The original, thanks, Nick. The original settlement for Jersey City was built on a mound. The original fort site location was on Washington Street. So again, speaks to this Society of Cincinnati code where these things are named after these different mound locations. There's an infamous Fortean researcher guy, cryptozoologist dude, Lauren Coleman, who has captured a lot of this same stuff I'm talking about here with this name game of the society in these mound locations, and something he calls the Twilight language. In the Fayette factor, as in Lafayette, the French general in charge of the French side of the society. He's in Washington. So he's captured a lot of this strange activity around these mound sites named out at locations named after either Washington or Lafayette. He calls it the Fayette factor. So, and that's kind of all I'm pointing out here is some more of that same stuff. Is this dude, Luis Garcia, I think it was just a crime of opportunity. He happened to be similar, similar body type. He wasn't a big old fat dude who lived in his mom's basement eating Cheetos, playing video games. He just, you know what I mean? He had this fairly skinny dude. He meets the kind of the BMI of most of the victims go, the medium, the average range BMI type of deal, not too skinny, not too fat. I'm just saying, like, I think within some of these victimizations of some of these young men, I don't think it's necessarily, there's not as much organized stalking going on. Some folks just happen to walk into a spider's web and, so to speak, and get victimized that way, like, in my opinion, Luis Garcia here. And I don't think I've discussed that case before. Figured Cole was interested in some of the connections with the mound stuff. I figured I'd dust off some of my old research from 2017 there and share some of those details here tonight.
Awesome, yeah.
Mounds in New Jersey. Yeah, lots of mounds in New Jersey. Yeah, for sure. No, thanks. Zodiac locations absolutely have to do with water. Those are absolutely water rituals. For sure.
Yeah, I think it's just the symbolism with that is pretty.
Yeah.
Cole,
sorry, you go first, Nick.
Was there anything that you wanted to talk about more with the stuff that you had? It's almost like
there's just a few more things.
Sure.
I wanted to answer. I see in the comments or the live chat here, Kelly says, "Are these men taken on full moons?" I don't know necessarily the lunar phase of the moon of when these men were taken, but I do know, like, other than the half moon connection and all that stuff with the name game and all that, like how JJ said, I do know another thing that I just remembered, that I was talking to Lori Faber, Randy Lexfold's sister,
No,
and I do know that she said that Randy was seen when he was recovered, that he was wearing clothes that he did not or that he was not last seen in. That he was wearing a Pink Floyd "Dark Side of the Moon" shirt, and
Dark Side of the Moon, yep.
he did not like Pink Floyd's music, and he would not be seen wearing a Pink Floyd shirt. Just granted, he didn't like the band. So, and he was on that night he disappeared. He literally, I guess there was some lunar phase or eclipse or some type of lunar pattern, and that where he was placed would have literally put him on the dark side of the moon.
Wow.
And another
like
thing
an
I'd
ads
like
above,
to add,
so below type of situation is what you're inferring.
what's that, JJ?
Like an ads above, so below type of situation. They're putting
Right,
they're putting
yes.
yeah, that's interesting. Very interesting.
Another thing I'd like to say is what I just came across in my notes here. I'm looking at them in Bangor, Maine. This is a weird location because it's not necessarily where there's like a hot spot or a cluster of these types of crimes. But the first one that I saw in Bangor, Maine was a man by the name of Matthew Lacrosse. And his name obviously sticks out because his last name is Lacrosse. And this happened on November 9th, 2007. His last name is Lacrosse, and he was last seen talking to a couple all night, which is a reoccurring theme in these, like in the Patrick McNeil case.
Sure.
And I'm here on his obituary, actually. And what sticks out to me is one of the first things that's mentioned about him is it says that he frequently enjoyed being on his computer. That's one of the first things that's said in his obituary, that is his enjoyment. And that really stuck out to me. Another thing is in Bangor, Maine, the same town, there was a man by the name of Paul Francis III, and he went by Junebug. And this happened 11 years after Matthew Lacrosse disappeared. And he was last seen 3 minutes from where the bar where Matthew Lacrosse was last seen. And he unfortunately was met with the same fate. And he was at a party and he was found dead in water.
And if I remember correctly, those are great points there, Cole. If I remember correctly, that Junebug fella was he was kind of he was into drugs, like he was into some drug circles.
I believe so. Yes,
if I remember that victim correctly. No, there's not a lot of victims in Maine. Those are definitely some outlying cases. Yeah, but great points. I think that speaks to the name game. So there's actually a detective who I think is more right than he is wrong on a lot of his assumptions. He's retired homicide detective from a town I used to live in Great Falls, Montana. Lived there for a few years. He actually was the lead detective on a cannibalistic cannibalistic kid diddling sex offender that I came face to face with in that town. He put that man in jail. A man by the name of Nathaniel Barjona, real sick individual. But this detective speaking of the Zodiac, wrote a whole book about how he thinks this one serial killer that no one's ever heard of, named Edward Wayne Edwards, was the Zodiac killer, amongst other occult, basically like a hand of death type of occult leader, and like a general in like a cult homicidal network around America. But one thing he points out about Edward Wayne Edwards was all of his murders, he had a name game that he played with all of his murders, whether it be the individuals, the sites, the towns, etc. There's always something connecting all these murders, and a through line from the first murder he committed when he was like 8 years old or some nonsense. And again, this dude spent time in like Boys Town, spent time in the Chillicothe Boys Reformatory. I'm actually in Chillicothe, Ohio right now. He spent time in the Chillicothe Boys Reformatory with Charles Manson here in Mound Country. This is the epicenter of Adena Mound Country in America. Is Chillicothe, Ohio, the first capital of the state of Ohio. But yeah, so this Edward Wayne Edwards guy, according to Detective John Cameron, Edwards always had a name game through all of his occult murders for 40-some years. And I think the guy was onto something. Again, this Wayne Edwards guy is a scary fellow. Oh, sorry, Cole, go ahead.
I think no, you're good. I think that's actually a very good point, because it seems just based off of the perpetrator's name that might be why he would be interested in the name game. I mean, just based off his first and last name, Edward Edwards.
Yeah. There you go. But yeah, when you see a victim like Matthew Lacrosse, it's like really makes you wonder. You got all these lacrosse captains and players that are being
Right.
murdered. Chris Jenkins, you got lacrosse Wisconsin, right? You got lacrosse games apparently invented there in lacrosse Wisconsin. The guy I mentioned before, Lieutenant Zebulon Pike, wrote about it in his notes and his surveys there in lacrosse of the mounds. Wrote about these folks playing the natives playing this game that would be called lacrosse, which is the namesake of the town. So yeah, to me it just seems obvious. Like this name game just seems obvious. Like things you're describing, Cole, with the half moon stuff, even possibly the name Brothers Bar seems to have some connotations to me that may have some deeper meanings to it, right? Especially when you're doing acts of the exact opposite of brotherhood by killing these young men. Right. I mean, I just think there's so much more to these name game. And again, I think this dude, John Cameron, is far more right than wrong in his assertions surrounding Edward Wayne Edwards. And again, the way he lays it out in his book, the book's called, I think it was called It Was Me, something to that effect. They did a whole Paramount miniseries on this, probably back 2018 or so. Anyway, he outlined John Cameron outlines Edward Wayne Edwards, all of his murders. There's this very bizarre name game. So I think that's probably not unique to Edward Wayne Edwards. It's probably something more unique to his network of occult homicidal killers. You know, in the sense of like, what's the fella down there in Texas was Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole that were often described as being these occult ritualistic homicidal killers,
Yes.
the serial killers that went around America. I think those guys' actual story is the actual story of Edward Wayne Edwards. The tale that they spun was so Edward Wayne Edwards is getting out of prison right at the same time those guys are going around on their national tour. You know, he's making parole on one of his many crimes. Yeah, this is a man just to speak to Edwards' abilities and what he accomplished relative to things like the Process Church that I've seen a lot in the chat about tonight too. Edward Wayne Edwards infiltrated the Atlanta child killing task force. He was not a cop. He was later caught with this uniform of a Marietta Police Department and had infiltrated that task force. And John Cameron is his allegations that Edward Wayne Edwards would often do this. He would infiltrate the investigations of his own murders. So there's a lot to be said, I think, to the actions of Edward Wayne Edwards versus how these crimes are unfolding with the staged drownings, because I think they at least operate within the same sphere of activity in the underworld of America.
Just to touch on what you said, JJ, about infiltrating the investigation, there's a lot of cases that I think, at least in regarding to the staged drownings, that at least we consider part of that
Sure.
the friend group that they're going out with, I think that they purposely infiltrate or put themselves in the investigation to narrate what is happening or what they say happened that night, particularly like with the friend groups. I mean, the police are obviously going to ask the people who were with the victim that night, and if all of them were in on this, or at least even some of them, and they tell the police one thing, I mean, they have control of what is being said, what happened that night. They get control of the narrative, and they can say what the victim did or didn't do, or how they were acting, even if it's true or not.
No, you're spot on. You're spot on, Cole. In fact, Jim Smith William Ramsey's researcher. We've had a discussion on here recently a few months ago with Jim Smith regarding these smiley face killings and these staged drownings. He would agree. In fact, he's got a great example of exactly what you just described out of a case out of Atlanta with a fellow from Australia.
And
Nazahimi, I believe, is his name.
Yep, that's exactly right. And his friend group was clearly dictating the investigation and the narrative surrounding it by feeding information to police. Yeah, absolutely. And they seem culpable as culpable can be, in that case.
I think that there are people infiltrating some of these chat sites that are online for these smiley face killers or these.
Oh, I thought you meant our chat. I was like, really?
No. I meant, some of these forums.
I'm just joking.
You never know.
No, I mean, that's a great thing, right? If you want to control the narrative surrounding your cold activities, I mean, why not go onto a Reddit and start or even start a Reddit forum on the topic, right? And feed a bunch of bullshit into it.
Most narcissists do.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a great way to distract things, right?
Yeah.
I agree with that.
I mean, I'm not part of a homicidal occult ritual killing group or anything, but like, it seems like a great idea to do something like that to distract from your group's activities. It's a great way to deter the attention, at least.
Yeah. On the downtime, from one homicide to the next, you got a lot of downtime.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, it speaks to the tech world, right? I mean, again, if you want to
so.
go back to your connections with all the tech stuff, I mean, there does seem to be a lot of these techie connections to the situation. So
I
think that falls right within that MO.
Yes, for sure.
Cole, was there anything else that you had?
I think I pretty much touched on everything I'd like to address. The major things such as like the wordplay and the locations of certain bar establishments in the radius and where victims were last seen, and where they also popped up afterward, like the Chris Jenkins case where he was reportedly at Lone Tree Bar and Grill, and then Brothers Bar and Grill has a location in like Lone Tree, Colorado. I think the name game was one of the major things I wanted to touch on because it clearly means something.
I think you're spot on target there, Cole. That's great stuff.
Imagine it was just like, let's play off of like the situation that actually happened, and you're playing with the names just to make up a fake thing to put down on the paperwork. Like, imagine like that's how it was, because it's like you're thinking of like, oh well, this is actually really what happened, but we can't say that. And you're like, oh well, this kind of rhymes with that. Fucking, we'll say it happened over here. Imagine it's like something that's silly, and it's got people like, yo, what the fuck? There's got to be gematria behind this and everything.
I think another major thing would be like the Native American Indian aspect of it, just in terms of the Hiawatha statue in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and so many victims' belongings found at the statue. Chris Jenkins dressed up as a Native American Indian. And the common denominator, like I said earlier, that I've noticed was the Brothers Bar and Grill location being involved with, somehow intertwined with this Native American Indian aspect of it.
For sure.
I think it means something to the people that are doing this. And the Sinsinawa, I mean, that's clearly a Native American term. I read online that it means like home of the young eagle or somewhat along the lines of that. There's a lot of Native American Indian language being used in these cases.
For sure.
Well, I do think if there's occultism involved, stuff like that, I would think is possibly clues of it.
Right.
Oh yeah, because like I think you would get into stuff like that.
Well, and the way I look at that, Nick, and I might be wrong because I'm not that skilled or well versed in the occult, but like, it seems like all these occult groups look back at ancient Egypt and they venerate it in some sort of holy capacity within their philosophies. But like, what if a civilization existed before ancient Egypt and they were building mounds here in this country? Why would they not look back and venerate it in the same capacity, right? So whereas the Egyptian Book of the Dead is a very common aspect in our modern culture, what if there was a mound builder Egyptian? What if there's a mound builder Book of the Dead, and these occult groups are venerating that book, like, and the philosophies and rituals in that book, like we know groups do that with the Egyptian Book of the Dead today, including bands like the Grateful Dead, who took their name from that book. Or Joseph Smith, who incorporates that all into Mormonism. You know, I mean, there's numerous examples of that stuff.
Well, that's even kind of like stuff that Lisa's pointed out a lot with other things, and maybe it even ties into this. Is that like a lot of times we do come across stuff that's like almost showing symbolism of like beliefs from Central America.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like sometimes like maybe, like you're saying, maybe they were more with mounds, and that's the style that's kind of being portrayed, or that's the style of I guess magic that's being portrayed. Hard to explain.
Yeah, the type of magic, right? Like some sort of flavor magic, if you will.
Well, the artistic way to depict what you're doing, something like that. Yeah. So I have wondered about that too. You have so many different belief systems, or people always searching for an older tradition. That you could have different things being replicated.
Yeah, I just if I can just make one more comment here before we close out here, put a little bookend on my comments around these mounds. I've gotten a lot of feedback over the years, like, oh, this can't be going on. Well, I mean, I just think, and I try to break things down. Operation GCD is garbage can do, but it's also the way I used to especially investigate things when I ran my private detective agency for years. Greatest common denominator, right? That's GCD. It's the way I look at things. Like, what's the greatest common denominator of this situation? Cole's brought up some great common denominators. A lot of these crimes with the name game, and a lot of the locations and bars, etc. I think that's all great work, Cole. Let's definitely keep up with the good work there for sure. But what I want to say about these mounds is, like, the greatest common denominator being, isn't it weird that ancient human sacrifice occurred at these same sites that modern day human sacrifice is going on with the murder of these young men? You know, I don't think that that's by any stretch of coincidence that these staged drownings and smiley face killings are occurring at the precise same sites of ancient human sacrifice. And these murders are a modern day ritual human sacrifice, the way they're being carried out. The you know, in a very old biblical sense, the best males of a society, the most skilled, most you know, knowledgeable males, the most, you know, they're going to benefit the society the most. They're the ones being called and offered to the gods in the Old Testament. And I think that's going on here today, and it's going on at the same sites. That's been going on here for thousands of years, these mound sites. And again, I don't think there's I'm still willing to entertain ideas that these killings and deaths and staged drownings are going on in sites that don't have mounds. But again, Albuquerque, New Mexico, a city of 0 mounds and lots of bars and college students, 0 drownings. Just saying. And if I may add one more note on that, there's I like to comment about I believe he's a anthropology professor from I believe Cornell University there in Ithaca, New York. And he commented, like, hey, isn't it weird? We've had like all of these strange deaths and this entire city's built on mounds. Isn't that weird? Yes, that guy brought up a great point, and no one really listened to him, I don't think, even his students. But I think there are people asking these questions, and I think it is very strange, this connection to these deaths and these, you know, again, as we call them, Indian mound sites, but really these sites of ancient human sacrifice. And it's, you know, there's something to it, in my opinion, for sure.
Yes.
Great conversation. Appreciate the invite, Nick and Lisa. Cole, great stuff. Great. Appreciate you joining us.
Yes, thank you all for having me.
Of course, of course. Cole, do you want to remind people where they can find you on Twitter or anything else that you got going on?
Yeah, the only social media that I have is on X or Twitter, and it's at Staged Drownings. So if you guys are interested in learning more about these staged drowning deaths or new victims, old victims, anything among the sorts, that's where you can find me.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And JJ, you want to plug your show real quick?
Host of Operation GCD. Thanks for the conversation. Definitely hope folks of the interwebs found it informative and somewhat entertaining as you can be when we're talking about such horrific details such as ritual human sacrifice. You know, wish I wasn't here talking about this, but we are in, because they are going on and they continue to go on because people don't realize these things are going on. But yeah, always happy to come back and talk more about the subject.
Oh yeah. And Lisa, thank you very much again also for jumping on. That's what's up. Yes, always have good talks on this. Sure. Thank you everybody who jumped in on the live chat. I had a good time. That's what's up. That's why I go live. I saw a lot of good stuff in there too. I tried to throw it up on the screen. Thank you again, Cole. That was great. That was your first podcast, you said, correct? I think also.
Yep, this is the first live podcast I've ever done.
Awesome, man.
Awesome.
So I'm glad we made that happen for you, and hopefully we see you again on some other shows possibly in the future.
Oh, for sure.
You're always welcome back on here too if you have something new. So thank you again. And yeah, that's it. That's the end of another Occult Rejects. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.